You know that classic image everyone's seen of human evolution? The one that shows like a hunched over ape,
Mm.
slowly standing up straighter and straighter until you get a modern human? Well, get ready to just chuck that image right out the window. Because today we are taking a deep dive into the very murky origins of humankind. And let me tell you, it is anything but a straight line. You guys requested this look at the earliest members of our genus Homo. So buckle up as we go back millions of years to uncover the truth about our ancient relatives.
And what's so fascinating about this topic is that the further back in time we go, the more complex the story actually gets. The timeline of human evolution, it's less like a neat line and more like a tangled bush with branches shooting off everywhere. Some of those branches lead to dead ends and others are full of surprises.
Okay, so tangle bushes, multiple branches, surprises. Sounds like things are about to get really complicated. But before we jump into all the specifics, how do we even define what makes a hominin human? When we're dealing with species that are millions of years old, I mean, where do scientists even begin to draw those lines?
You're absolutely right. It gets incredibly tricky. Just imagine scientists huddled over a handful of teeth and bone fragments, trying to make sense of it all. They're looking for the tiniest clues in things like tooth size, the shape of a skull, even the structure of the pelvis to try to figure out how these early hominins actually moved and lived. It's like piecing together a puzzle, but with only a few pieces.
So it's a real detective story, huh? I remember back in the day watching those documentaries about Lucy and early humans. It all seemed so straightforward back then. Now it sounds like things got a whole lot more complex.
Oh, they absolutely have. And to make things even more interesting, you have to remember that early Homo species weren't the only hominins on the scene. You remember Australopithecus? They were walking upright millions of years ago. But picture them with longer arms and a much smaller brain, probably spending time both on the ground and in the trees. Kind of like a bipedal chimpanzee, if you can imagine that.
Okay, I'm starting to see how tangled this evolutionary bush really is. So
Yeah.
we've got Australopithecus hanging out in the trees and walking around. Who else was part of this prehistoric party?
Well, you've got Paranthropus, for example. You might have heard of them referred to as Nutcracker Man. Because of their incredibly powerful jaws and massive teeth, they were built for munching on really tough, fibrous plants. Definitely not your average salad eaters.
Nutcracker man,
Yes.
that's a great image. And all these different species were coexisting with the early Homo species that we're focusing on today.
Exactly. Which really challenges that old idea of a single linear progression from ape to human. The reality is much more messy and exciting.
Okay, so we're already starting to shatter some long-held assumptions. Now let's actually delve into some of these early Homo species. I'm particularly interested in Homo habilis, the so-called handyman.
Ah,
Didn't they get that nickname because they were thought to be the first tool makers?
that was the prevailing theory for a long time, yes. But here's where the handyman story takes a really fascinating turn. You see, Homo habilis possessed some surprisingly primitive features. Their arms, for instance, suggest they may have still been spending some time climbing trees. And while they did make tools, their brain size was still relatively small compared to later Homo species.
Wait, so they were making tools with smaller brains than we might expect. Doesn't that kind of throw a wrench in that whole linear view of human evolution we were just talking about?
It absolutely does. It suggests that the relationship between brain size and tool making might be a lot more complex than we originally thought. It turns out our ancestors weren't following a neat and predictable path. They were constantly adapting and evolving in ways that really challenge our assumptions.
This is incredible. I'm starting to realize how much there is to learn about these early humans. And speaking of fascinating discoveries, what about Homo rudolfensis? I know they have a pretty interesting backstory, and even their name is a bit controversial, right?
Absolutely. Homo rudolfensis is a bit of an enigma. First of all, they had a surprisingly flat face and a much larger brain than Homo habilis, which throws another curveball into that linear evolution narrative.
Okay, so larger brain, flatter face. Definitely shaking things up again.
Yeah.
But you mentioned a controversy about their name. What's that all about?
Well, Homo rudolfensis gets its name from Lake Rudolph in Kenya, where some of the first fossils were discovered. The problem is that Lake Rudolph was a name given during colonial times, and it's since been renamed to Lake Turkana. So some researchers argue that the species name should also be changed to reflect this shift away from a colonial legacy.
That's a really interesting point. I can see how using a name tied to a colonial past could be problematic, especially when we're talking about something as sensitive as human origins.
Precisely. It raises important questions about how we name and classify species, and how those choices can reflect broader historical and social contexts. But for now, the name Homo rudolfensis persists, and it's important to acknowledge that context as we discuss them.
I'm learning so much already. And we're just getting started. So we've got these different Homo species, each with their own unique features. Plus, Australopithecus and Paranthropus, all living in Africa at around the same time. This is shattering that myth of a straight line of evolution, isn't it?
It is indeed. We're talking about a mosaic of hominin species, all interacting and adapting to their environment in different ways around 2 million years ago. And guess what? This already complex picture gets even more intriguing when we consider the discovery of stone tools that predate the entire Homo genus. We're talking tools that are 3.3 million years old.
Hold on. Tools from before Homo even existed. That's blown my mind. Doesn't that mean that tool making wasn't unique to our lineage after all?
It seems that way. This discovery has forced a complete reevaluation of our understanding of early hominin capabilities, and it raises fascinating questions about which species were making these tools and what they were using them for. We might have to rethink everything we thought we knew about the origins of technology.
This is why I love these deep dives. It's like taking everything you thought you knew, shaking it all up, and piecing it back together in a whole new way.
Exactly. And we're just getting started. There's so much more to uncover as we explore the murky origins of humankind. So we've got this incredible mix of hominins all sharing the African landscape millions of years ago. It really makes you wonder, what were their relationships like? Were they competing for resources? Were they just tolerating each other? Or maybe even interbreeding?
Ooh, now that's a question that sparks the imagination. I know we've learned that modern humans have some Neanderthal DNA. Could something similar have happened with these earlier Homo species? I mean, they were all living in relatively close proximity, right?
That's right. And while we don't have definitive genetic evidence yet, to actually prove interbreeding between those early Homo species, it's certainly a possibility that scientists are exploring. Just imagine those encounters, different groups with their own ways of life coming face to face. It really paints a vivid picture of this prehistoric world.
It really does. And it makes me think about the bigger question of what was driving all this diversity in the first place. Why were there so many different hominin species, all coexisting in Africa around 2 million years ago? It seems like there's a lot of evolutionary experimentation going on.
You hit the nail on the head. It was a really dynamic time in Africa's environmental history. Think fluctuating climates, a whole mosaic of habitats from dense forests to open grasslands, all shifting over time. Different hominin species may have adapted to very specific niches within these really diverse environments. Some might have thrived in forests, while others were better suited to the savanna.
That reminds me of those famous finches that Darwin studied on the Galapagos Islands, how they developed different beak shapes, depending on what kind of food was available on each island.
Exactly. But the environment is only one part of the puzzle. We also have to consider things like competition for resources, isolation between populations, even just pure chance. It's a complex interplay of forces that shape the evolution of these early hominins.
So it wasn't just a simple march of progress towards becoming human. It was a lot more chaotic and unpredictable than that, with different groups trying out different adaptations and lifestyles.
Precisely. And it's a good reminder that evolution isn't always about reaching some predetermined goal. Sometimes it's simply about survival and passing on genes in a world that's constantly changing. We humans, with all of our accomplishments, are products of those same evolutionary forces. We're not the end point of some grand plan, but rather one outcome of a long branching process that's still unfolding.
It's a humbling thought.
Yeah.
We're just one branch on this massive evolutionary tree,
Right.
connected to all those ancient hominins we've been talking about. But I have to ask, why should we care about what happened millions of years ago? What can these ancient relatives tell us about ourselves today?
That's a question worth pondering. It might seem like ancient history, but understanding our origins can help us understand who we are on a fundamental level. It's like tracing your family tree, but on a much grander scale. By studying the challenges and adaptations of our ancient relatives, we can gain insights into our own biology, our behavior, even our place in the world.
So it's not just about digging up old bones and classifying them. It's about connecting with our deep past and using those insights to understand our present.
Exactly. Think about it. The transition to bipedalism, the development of tool making, the expansion of the brain. These are all key chapters in the human story. that have played out over millions of years. By studying those chapters, we can learn more about how our bodies work, how our minds evolved, and even how we interact with our environment. It gives us a fresh perspective on what it means to be human.
It really does. And it makes me wonder, with all the amazing discoveries that have been made in recent years, what else is out there waiting to be found? What other secrets are hidden in the fossil record, ready to reshape our understanding of the past?
That's the beauty of paleoanthropology. It's a field that's full of mystery and potential for new discoveries, considering the vastness of time and the relatively small number of fossils that we've actually unearthed. There are undoubtedly countless stories still waiting to be told. Each new find has the potential to rewrite the history of human evolution, and that's what makes this field so exciting.
It's like we're piecing together a giant puzzle, and each new fossil is another piece. That helps us see the bigger picture. And it's not just about the past. It's about understanding our place in the world today and what our future might hold as a species. Speaking of the future, where do we go from here? What are some of the big unanswered questions
Yeah.
that researchers are grappling with? One of the biggest mysteries, I think, is trying to pin down exactly how all these different hominin species interacted with each other. Were they competing for the same resources? Did they try to avoid each other altogether? Or was there maybe some level of cooperation or even some kind of cultural exchange happening between these groups? It's fascinating to imagine all those different possibilities.
It really is. And that's where things get really challenging for researchers. We can try to reconstruct ancient environments and analyze fossil evidence for clues about diet and behavior. But piecing together those social dynamics between different hominin groups, it's like trying to solve a puzzle with most of the pieces missing.
So we're talking about a whole lot of speculation and educated guesses,
Yeah.
which I guess is part of what makes this field so exciting. It's like we're detectives trying to solve a cold case millions of years old.
That's a great analogy. We have to examine every bit of evidence really carefully and try to connect the dots. And sometimes new discoveries come along that throw a whole new wrench into our theories and force us to rethink everything we thought we knew.
Like those 3.3 million-year-old tools that we were talking about earlier. It's incredible to think about a time when tool-making was happening, even before the Homo genus even emerged. It really challenges our assumptions about the origins of technology and what it means to be human.
It really does. And it makes you wonder, what other groundbreaking discoveries are still out there, just waiting to be unearthed? Every time we find a new fossil, it has the potential to totally change our understanding of the past.
Yeah, it's almost like each new discovery is like a window into a lost world, offering us this little glimpse into the lives of these incredible creatures that came before us. And those glimpses can be so powerful, even if they leave us with more questions than answers.
Exactly. I think that sense of mystery is a big part of what keeps us so fascinated by human evolution. It's a journey of constant discovery, and we're really just beginning to scratch the surface.
And it's a journey that all of us are still part of, even millions of years later. We carry the legacy of those ancient hominins within our very DNA. I think it's important to remember that. As we continue to explore our origins, it's not just about the science. It's about connecting with our deep past on a personal level.
I couldn't agree more. Learning about our ancestors can teach us so much about who we are as a species and our place in this grand scheme of things. It's a very humbling and inspiring experience.
It really is. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the murky origins of humankind. I hope you found this journey as fascinating as we did.
We've only just begun to uncover the secrets of our ancient past, so stay curious and keep exploring. There's a whole world of incredible discoveries waiting out there.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive into human evolution, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more mind-expanding explorations of all sorts of fascinating topics, all curated from your own sources. We'll see you next time for another insightful adventure.